One of these movies was made by Disney and it was so dark people walked out of the theater. Another one had its effects built entirely by hand, and it still looks better than anything Hollywood makes today with a billion-dollar budget. I found 10 80s fantasy movies that got completely buried, and every single one of them is worth your time tonight. In 1984, most fantasy movies were playing it safe. You had your heroes, your villains, your quests. Everything was pretty straightforward. But there was this British film that decided to do something completely different. It's a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood, except it's not really a retelling. The whole movie takes place inside the mind of a sleeping girl, and what starts as a fairy tale slowly turns into something much darker. It's got this dreamlike quality where you're never quite sure what's real and what isn't. And then, without warning, it becomes a full-on nightmare. Fantasy and horror don't get mixed together very often. Even now, most filmmakers treat them as separate genres. Back in the 80s, almost nobody was willing to try it. The Company of Wolves was one of the few that dared. Roger Ebert reviewed it in 1985 and tried to explain what watching it felt like. He said you always know what's happening, but you rarely know why or how it connects to anything else or how you can escape from it. He said that's almost the definition of a nightmare. That's exactly what this movie is. Before Conan showed up in 1982 and defined what sword and sorcery movies would look like for the rest of the decade, there was Hawk the Slayer. The plot is classic fantasy stuff. Two brothers are fighting over a magical sword that has a stone embedded in it. The sword lets you communicate with it telepathically, which is pretty cool. Their father ends up dead, and now each brother has to raise an army to settle things once and for all. It's not a good movie. The set design is questionable, the dialogue is cheesy. There are moments that will make you laugh out loud, and not because they're supposed to be funny, but something happens when you actually sit down and watch it. It's one of those movies that are so bad they loop back around to being entertaining. It's got this weird charm to it. The people making it clearly cared, even if they didn't have the budget or the skill to pull off what they were trying to do. By 1987, the barbarian movie trend was starting to wind down. Conan had come and gone, a bunch of imitators had flooded the market, and people were getting tired of muscular guys swinging swords. So when the Barbarians showed up, not many people cared, which is too bad because this movie knew exactly what it was doing. The setup is straightforward. A peaceful tribe gets massacred by a warlord. He makes the mistake of keeping two of the tribe's youngest kids alive as prisoners. Years pass, those kids grow up absolutely massive. Muscles on top of muscles. They break free, find other survivors, and go on a bloody revenge quest. There's nudity, there's violence, there's everything you'd expect from an R-rated barbarian flick. What's great about it is that it doesn't take itself seriously. It leans into the goofiness of it all. It knows that watching two giant twins tear through an army is silly, and it embraces that instead of pretending to be some grim epic. This is exactly the kind of movie you want to throw on with some friends and a few beers. In 1982, someone designed a sword with 3 blades stacked on top of each other, and 2 of those blades could launch out like projectiles. This is the dumbest weapon ever put on film, and I mean that as a compliment. The movie is called The Sword and the Sorcerer, and that ridiculous sword tells you everything you need to know about what kind of film this is. It's not trying to be realistic. It's not trying to win awards. It saw Conan the Barbarian doing serious epic fantasy and said, what if we just had fun instead? The plot is pretty standard revenge stuff. Evil sorcerer teams up with evil king. They massacre the good king and his army. The prince escapes and spends years planning payback. When he finally comes back, he's got that triple-bladed monstrosity and he's ready to use it. Here's something that's harder than it sounds: making a good dragon. Think about how many movies have tried. How many times you've seen some winged lizard on screen and thought that looks fake or that's not scary. Dragons are one of the most common fantasy creatures and one of the hardest to pull off. Most productions just give up and hope you won't notice. Dragonslayer didn't give up. This came out in 1981. Before Jurassic Park, before CGI could do anything convincing, and it understood something important. If your whole movie is about killing a dragon, that dragon better be terrifying. So they built one that was. The setup is classic medieval fantasy. A dragon named Vermithrax rules the kingdom through fear. The only way people survive is by sacrificing their own to feed it. A wizard's apprentice decides enough is enough and sets off to kill the thing. Time magazine wrote that Vermithrax was one of the only movie monsters that actually lived up to the hype. All those terrified witnesses describing the beast throughout the film, all that build-up and dread, and then when you finally see it, it delivers. The effects work in this movie is 40 years old and it still holds up. Arnold Schwarzenegger made Conan the Barbarian in 1982. It turned him into a movie star. So 3 years later, he signed up for another Barbarian movie based on a character from the same comic book universe. Red Sonja flopped. Critics dismissed it. And if you're expecting another Conan, you're going to be disappointed. It doesn't have the same weight or the same ambition. But that's the thing though, Red Sonja isn't trying to be Conan. The story is pretty basic. Woman gets attacked, swears revenge, and teams up with a muscular guy to get that revenge. The movie knows it's campy. The dialogue is ridiculous on purpose. The fights are theatrical in a way that feels more like a comic book than a serious action film. Schwarzenegger shows up as Lord Kalidor, which is basically Conan with a different name, but he's clearly just here to have a good time. And that's the key. Red Sonja works if you stop comparing it to the movie Schwarzenegger made 3 years earlier and just let it be what it is. 90 minutes of swords, revenge, and absolutely zero pretension. In 1983, somebody looked at the fantasy genre and thought, what if we add aliens? The world of Krull gets invaded by an intergalactic tyrant called the Beast. His armies wipe out the kingdoms. A prince named Conan survives and has to gather a band of heroes to fight back. So you've got swords and sorcery, but the enemy is from outer space. Fantasy meets science fiction in a way that hadn't really been done before. The problem was, nobody knew what to make of it. Critics looked at this thing and couldn't figure out if it was trying to be Star Wars or Lord of the Rings. It sat somewhere in the middle where nothing else existed, so it got dismissed as a mess. But here's what makes Krull worth tracking down now. In that band of heroes, there's a young Irish actor playing one of the smaller roles. You wouldn't have noticed him in 1983. His name was Liam Neeson. If you grew up in the 80s, you know the name Beastmaster even if you can't remember a single thing about the plot. This movie was everywhere. The plot is nothing special. A hero named Dar can communicate with animals. An evil wizard killed his family. Dar wants revenge. You've seen this 1,000 times, and the movie is over 2 hours long for no good reason. It's campy, it's cheesy, it's got some truly ridiculous action. And then something weird happened. Cable television was exploding in the 80s, and networks needed content to fill airtime. The Beastmaster became one of those movies that just played constantly. It just played and played and played until an entire generation of kids had it lodged in their brains through sheer repetition. Here's how deep it got. 15 years later, at the end of the 90s, they made a Beastmaster TV series. A mediocre 1982 fantasy movie got a spin-off show in 1999 because HBO had accidentally turned it into a generational touchstone. Everybody knows The Wizard of Oz, one of the most beloved family films ever made. In 1985, half a century later, Disney decided to make a sequel, and they decided to go dark. The original Frank Baum books were actually pretty disturbing in places. The 1939 movie smoothed all of that out to make something safe and family-friendly. The sequel went back to the source material. Dorothy returns to Oz and it's a nightmare. The place is crumbling. There are creatures called wheelers, guys with wheels for hands and feet chasing her. There's a witch who keeps a collection of living severed heads in glass cases. The whole movie has this eerie, unsettling atmosphere that never lets up. Parents brought their kids expecting another lighthearted adventure. The movie traumatized them instead, so pretty much everyone hated it and the sequel flopped at the box office. This one got dismissed before anyone gave it a chance, because it was animated, and in 1982, animated meant kids' stuff. The setup sounds simple enough. Magic is dying because science is taking over the world. A group of wizards try to save what's left. One of them, voiced by James Earl Jones, decides humanity deserves to be destroyed for abandoning the old ways. A modern scientist, voiced by John Ritter, gets pulled back in time to stop him. That's not a kids' movie premise. That's asking real questions about whether we lose something valuable when we abandon old ways for new ones, whether progress has a cost. But because it was animated, it got shelved in the kids section and ignored. Flight of Dragons deserved a bigger audience than it got. It's been waiting 40 years for people to take it seriously.